Hello, I am Gigi Howard, and I am so glad to be here with you again for our 2025 edition of Every Library Live Banned Books Week Fest. All right, so Every Library is the first and only national political action organization for libraries. They are working across the country to support the freedom to read, defend the First Amendment, and make sure that libraries have the resources they need to serve their communities. This week, we are celebrating the power of books and stories that challenge, inspire, and sometimes even change the world. A little bit about me. I am a librarian. I am also the host of the podcast Drinks in the Library, where every week I interview a guest about their favorite book and we pair it with a drink. New episodes come out every Tuesday, so I hope you check us out. All right, so I am so excited to be here with you tonight to guide this conversation with authors Charlotte Sullivan Wild and Katherine Locke. We're going to be digging into their work, celebrating stories that affirm identity, freedom of speech, and the right to read. So we're going to go ahead and bring on Charlotte right now. Hi, Charlotte. How are you?
Oh, how are you?
Good. All right. Charlotte Sullivan Wild is the author of several picture books, including Love, Violet. This was illustrated by Charlene Chow. It was a Stonewall Book Award winner, a Charlotte Huck Honor Book, Lambda Literary Award finalist, and Bookstagang's, what a fun name, Bookstagang's Best of 2022 for future classics and community favorites. Charlotte has previously worked as an educator, a bookseller, a volunteer radio host, and creator of children's literature events. All right, so Charlotte, you're originally from Minnesota, but now you're wherever your wife stations, and you're in Colorado, right?
That's correct. Yes, we are.
Yes. And we were talking before about the weather. How's the weather in Colorado?
Oh, it's gorgeous. It's gorgeous. 4 seasons, all temperate. It's not like Minnesota where it kills you for 6 months.
Oh, awesome. I love that. All right. So let's talk about the inspiration behind Love, Violet, writing for children, discovering friendships, and first crushes.
I thank you, Gigi, for moderating today. And thank you to Charlene Chua for her beautiful illustrations on this book, and to Matt Kitts for everything they've done for us. But I wanted to say that this book was inspired for me by my own childhood crushes. And I loved that you picked the theme of finding your voice, because that is so wrapped up in this book, but also my own experience of finally understanding my own queerness. I grew up in the 80s, and basically anything queer was censored, as well as many BIPOC perspectives from immigrants. And so I grew up not even knowing that LGBTQ people could exist when I was really little. And my first introduction to that was insults on the playground. And I remember being in 2nd or 3rd grade and thinking, if I look up the word lesbian in the dictionary, will it explain it to me? You know, and it just, I had no knowledge. And then the only other thing I learned was I'm from a long line of evangelical pastors and missionaries. And so all of the information I was getting from the radio was these horror stories about how evil LGBTQ people were, and how they were violent and scary and all men. And so there was just no room for me to even think that that could be me. And all the messages were that, you know, queerness was not something that you were born with, that you had your whole life. It was something that you chose to be bad, which is obviously not the case. And so it took me until my 30s to finally recognize who I was. And when I did, I was already married to a man. I was a professor at a conservative religious school. And so it just caused so much upheaval. And the other surprising thing about that was when I finally realized who I was, I look back at my life and I was stunned, because the evidence was there the whole time. Even back to my first crush in pre-K, another crush in elementary school, not dating in high school, refusing to kiss my first boyfriend on the lips for spiritual reasons. It was all there. But then I also remembered how I had censored myself. every time I had some awareness of who I was, I scolded myself. And I would say, no, forget that, never tell. And I would forget it. And it got to the point where I was always a storyteller and a writer. And in high school, writing was pouring out of me, plays and poems and journals. And when I got to about 17, I was in love with my best friend, but I couldn't acknowledge that. And I felt like that and my passion for writing was pulling me away from God. And so I stopped writing because I think that to tell the truth, I would have had to face things that I couldn't face. And that was kind of the pattern. And it was actually when I was in my Master's of Fine Arts class that I started writing again. And I kind of wrote my way out of the closet because I kept writing these stories about queer pastors' kids. I'm like, I don't know why I'm doing that. So when it finally happened and I was finally free again, I thought, what would that have meant to me to have had authentic, realistic stories about LGBTQ people from the beginning? Because I had to root out so many hateful messages and so much queer phobia and prejudice that I didn't know I had. But if kids start just seeing people as people, they don't have to do that. And so that was why I wrote Love Violet, because this really represents what my earliest crushes felt like. And they were so full of this sort of wonder and awe and just joy about this amazing person that I thought was so fantastic. And one of the things that was sort of interesting about this story was I didn't intend to do this, but when I wrote it, the plot ended up being about Violet finding the courage to share her heart, even when it's pounding, right?
Yeah.
And I realized after I had written it that that was my journey as well, is coming out. And the other thing I will say about that is that, well, there's two things. One is that when I was writing it, I wanted it to be really, really authentic to the age level, something that critics will pretend is not the case. And so like I drew on really specific details from my earliest crushes and my friends' earliest crushes. And I talked to children, I talked to teachers and to parents. I was really, really careful. And I'm an educator, so I really care about developmental level. But the other thing that happened as I was writing it was that the note I kept getting was Violet's emotions not coming out on the page. And I sort of realized I had spent my whole life repressing who I was and repressing love and feelings. And so the act of writing this book pushed me to dig that out and to sort of free that part of my voice again. And so for me, when parents write me and tell me like, oh, my child is hugging your book and they love it. And, it means so much to them. Or I got a lot of messages from adults who said, I wept because this was the first time I saw myself as a child on the page. When that happens, it means so much to me, because to be in the place where I could write this book took a lot. It took a big journey of bringing out that voice and finding it again. And my dearest hope is that children, whatever their identity or their journey is, that they will see that, they are lovable, and that if they are vulnerable and brave and let out their voices, that is how they connect with the world. And that's how they change the world. So that's kind of the story of Love Violet.
I love that. And I want to show, I love this so much. And you and Charlene's pictures in the back, it's pictures of you from when you were Violet's age, when Charlotte was Violet's age. I thought that was so sweet.
That was a really intentional choice. I asked if we could do that because I grew up with all the ugly stereotypes and awful messages. And so I knew that people were going to say things like, oh, there's sex in the book, which, I mean, obviously you would never do that. And on what page, right? But I wanted them to see us because we both are we're queer creators. And so it's like, this is who we were. This is our life. Like, our queer childhood was real. We're not making this up. So that was an intentional choice. Thank you for noticing that.
Yeah, I love that so much. Well, thank you for sharing that. And that just gives so much of the importance of queer joy and
Yes.
discovery of oneself. And I mean, what an amazing journey. So thank you so much for sharing that, Charlotte.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So I want to take some time to bring Katherine on right now. Hi, Katherine. How are you?
Hi, how are you?
Oh, so good. All right. So Katherine is an
Yes.
award-winning and critically acclaimed author for all ages, including picture books like What Are Your Words? And this is a book about pronouns. We've both got it. I love it.
Yeah.
Bedtime for Superheroes and Being Friends with Dragons. Middle school titles such as This Is Our Rainbow, Gender Rebels, and Athlete is a Gender, and young adult titles including This Rebel Heart, Loki, Journey into Mystery, and the Balloon Makers duology. They have 4 cats, 1 horse, and a lifelong love for chai lattes, which I do as
Yep.
well. It's the best.
I agree. I agree. I'm very picky about my chai lattes.
Mhm.
And there may be cats coming in and out of my lap, so
We
you
love
may or may
that.
not see a feline appearance.
It's so much better when there's cats. I have a cat here as
Yes.
well. We'll see if she comes on. I don't know. All right. So
Okay.
all right. So I wanted to talk about what are your words, and it introduces children to gender inclusive pronouns. So what was the impetus for you for writing this wonderful book?
Thank you. Thanks so much. I'm excited to be here and I'm excited to talk about this book. So, this book came to be because at the time, there really was not like a narrative picture book around what it's like for a child to be using um, different pronouns that may or may not align with their assigned gender at birth. So there have been like picture books that were more nonfiction, like these are different pronouns that people might use, but there was not one that just walked us through a kid's experience. And I really wanted to show that. I wanted a world in which um, a neighborhood in which a kid like where everybody asked each other their pronouns and their words. I wanted a world where everybody respected those pronouns and words right from the get-go. They were accepted as truth. So it was really important to me to not only show the kid's experience, in this case, this kid named Ari, but I also wanted to show all of these adults and model that language and that behavior for adults in these kids' lives. So a lot of us grew up not hearing pronouns like they, them for a singular person or they, zir. I didn't grow up with those either. So I understand when people are confused, and I wanted to model it's all right to be confused, but this is how you ask for them, and this is how you use them in a sentence.
Okay. Yeah. And also like letting kids find their words in their own time. I think Ari in the
Yeah.
story, that is their journey. And you want to
Yep.
talk about that, about what that's like?
Yeah. So Ari at the beginning is super excited that their uncle Lior is coming to visit. And Uncle Lior uses they, them pronouns and really models for Ari the experience of needing to use pronouns and figure out what words fit each day. And Ari is a gender creative kid. Ari doesn't know exactly what words fit them in the long run. I'm using they, them because those are the pronouns that Ari eventually settles on. But there are also other days where Ari uses he, him, or she, her, or am. And all of those are in the book. But I wanted to show that feeling of, you know what, that just doesn't feel like me today. And to have that be okay, that it's okay for kids to be experimenting with their gender and figuring out who they are in the world. The same way that kids are figuring out, like, am I athletic? Am I artistic? Like, what type of art makes me feel good? And what types of way of moving my body and dancing or cheer or playing soccer make me feel the most me? That's the same issue that we might have with words or other adjectives to describe ourselves. I might describe myself as artistic and anxious, but tomorrow I might not feel very anxious, right? So those words can change every day too. So that's part of it, is that in the book, the words that people use to describe themselves, both adjectives and nouns and pronouns, are all displayed around each of the characters in the book. And pronouns are just part of the way that we describe ourselves. So I also wanted to push back on the idea that only certain people use pronouns. We all use pronouns every day. When I get certain types of emails that are like, I'm never going to use a pronoun. You can't make me use pronouns. I'm like, you used a pronoun, use many pronouns in this email that you wrote me. So we
Mhm.
all use pronouns, and I wanted to use those as part of Ari's experience of learning somebody else's pronouns and learning what pronouns fit them.
Yeah. I'm very interested in hear what kind of feedback you've gotten from young readers and their families, and
Yeah.
what are you hearing?
I I think just like Charlotte, I've heard from people of all ages. So I've heard from little kids who really identify with Ari, who are still figuring out kind of where they sit in the world and what words are best to describe themselves.
Mhm.
And those are always the most heartwarming for me. I love hearing from kids who are like, I didn't know my words and then I learned my words. And I'm like, that is awesome. I'm so glad you have your words. And I love hearing from parents who are like, I got this book to talk to my kid about their classmate. And on the way, I was like, you know what? Actually, she, her does feel very squirmy when I hate when I use she, her for me. And maybe there is a different word. So I've also heard from parents and guardians who've been reading it and said that really kind of opened up that maybe not everybody has that experience and maybe there are better words for me. So I also love hearing that. I got tagged in a TikTok one time of a little kid asking a barista, "What are your words?" And it was because he had read my picture book and learned to like ask people what their pronouns were. And seeing it in action was the best. I love seeing a picture book go into the real world like that.
Yeah. Wow, that's amazing. Going viral.
Yeah, gosh, I hope.
Yeah, and I guess for kids and parents, like, what are you hoping that they take away from Ari's journey, from what he's seeing, the love that he's seeing from his uncle and other people, and or
Mhm.
that they're seeing it from other people in their neighborhood?
I really want kids to take I think there are two different things. I want kids to take away that there are adults that will love and affirm them in the world.
Mhm.
And those may or may not be the people immediately around them, but they could be people in the neighborhood and teachers and mechanics and gardeners and bakers and all these other people that are a part of our community, that they should expect and hopefully receive affirmation for who they are, regardless of their gender identity anywhere in their life, right? I also want to model for kids like this is how we speak with each other. So the kids that are reading this book may or may not be gender creative kids. They might have a brother who is, or a classmate or a cousin, and I want to help them learn that language too. For parents, parents and guardians and teachers and librarians, everyone who's reading this book to kids, I really want them to learn the language of modeling affirmation to a kid. That it's okay if kids don't exactly know who they are. We don't have to tell them who they are. We can help support them in their journey to figuring out who they are. And that's a really different experience than I think many of us had when we were
Yeah.
growing up. And I really want to see that type of journey for kids going forward.
Yeah. I think I'm gonna ask the tough question of, like people like me, where I just missed it, used the
Mm-hmm.
wrong words for Ari. What,
Yeah.
like, I think you're doing a calling in for this kind of thing. Like, what would you say for people who are worried, oh, I said the wrong thing, or that those moments?
It's totally okay. Like it happens, right? We all make mistakes. I've mispronounced words. I've gotten people's gender and people's pronouns wrong too. It happens to me just as much as it might happen to you. So I think the first thing is as soon as you notice that you misgendered someone, stopping saying, I'm sorry, I misgendered, and then correcting going forward. kind of lingering or wallowing on the apology puts the burden on the other person to say, like, it's okay when maybe it wasn't, but saying, I'm sorry and fixing it just moves on. And that's the best way to handle it. And I think that when I first started using they, them, people in my life were like, that's going to be hard. And I was like, that's okay. It's going to be hard. That's totally fine. But practice, like talk to your cat and say, Catherine is coming to visit this weekend. They are going to sleep in the guest bedroom. They are going to want to go to the coffee shop and get a chai latte. So practice with your pets, talk to the mirror, talk aloud, just practice those pronouns. But again, it's okay to make mistakes. Just make sure that you stop, you say, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to misgender you, or I didn't mean to misgender the character, and then correct moving forward. You handled it perfectly.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Oh, I think that's probably that's when I talk to other people about it, that's what I hear is the fear of making the mistakes and not wanting to offend anyone. So yeah,
Yeah.
I
I
think it's
think
important.
that, you're coming from a good place, right? If you're worried about offending someone, you're worried that, oh gosh, I'm going to get their pronouns wrong. Like you're coming from an okay place, right? You're already starting from a place of, I know these words are important to this person. And
Yeah.
that's really great. Like I appreciate that. When you're saying, I'm worried I'm going to misgender you, you're identifying that my pronouns are important words to me. And I think that that is a really important way of going through the world, is just knowing that pronouns do have importance and weight and they matter, and that the more that you pay attention to them, the better you get at it.
Yeah. Oh, well, I love that. Thank you so much. All right. So now's the fun part. We're going to bring
Yeah.
Charlotte back and we're going to have some convo. All right. Both of these picture books really spark empathy and self-discovery. And I wanted to have a conversation around the importance of that and how that is, you bring it out in your writing. Charlotte, do you want to tee us off here?
Sure. I 100% agree. I feel like in this season where there's so much book banning, the thing that we're losing the most is this opportunity for children to rehearse empathy, to practice putting themselves in someone else's shoes. And it's one of the most basic concepts of how we do society, is to take care of each other, right? And I think the other thing that's interesting about stories is that when we listen to stories, research has shown that we switch into a different part of our brain. And so if I just sat here and preached at you and told you my opinions, there are walls that go up. But when you start telling a story, those walls go down and we kind of lean in, because we're wired for stories. Stories are how we pass on information and questions. They show how we survive really hard things. And they show us ultimately how we are all connected. And so, like when I was working on Love, Violet, I kept thinking of it as a really human, universal story, not, oh, this is only a queer story. I was thinking about, what is it like when you feel so anxious to speak up and to say something that's really vulnerable for you? And everybody can identify with that. And so I think something that struck me this last year, both of our books were included in a Supreme Court case, Mahmoud versus Taylor, about opt-outs. And one of the big arguments that the lawyers made in the case was that, oh, these books are pushing identities, and they say that your whole value is in your identity. But the reality is, if you actually read the books, the message of every single book, including Katherine's so beautifully illustrated, is that our value is in who we are, in our whole self. That your identity, your biological sex, your orientation is just one flavor of who you are. It's one strand. And that's why I love Katherine's book too, because it's about the pronouns, but it's also about like these other adjectives. And that's so right on. So I think the goal of books like this is to help kids to identify with other characters that are like themselves. And I think for me growing up, when I finally did discover LGBTQ stories, so many of them were tragic and they have these horrible endings with death and just awful things happening. And part of the reason why it was so important to create a joyful story that has a happy ending is that it allows kids to identify and say, yes, every kid should have that happy ending. Like, this is for everyone. We're cheering for Violet. And we're not focused on, I mean, this book doesn't actually even talk about gender orientation. It's all within the experience. It's an insider story. And I feel like that's really true of Katherine's too, is that it's an insider emotional story of like, what is this person feeling? And that's really what stories do best. They connect us to each other.
Yeah. Katherine, what do you think?
I'm just going to go ahead and say thank you so much to Charlotte because she really summed it up so well. I think that um, we want any kid can pick up these books. I think that sometimes with like certain diverse books, people give like the LGBTQ picture books to the child who might be LGBTQ or growing up in a family where there are other LGBTQ family members, right? But these books are for everybody. Everybody can identify with some piece of this book and learn something and take away something from it and take away an experience and find common ground. And that's what stories do best. And that's how we build a bigger community. And that's what I'm always trying to do with my books. And I'm sure that Charlotte's always trying to do with her books, right? Is like, we just want more community and more connection between people. We want to reach more people. We want kids to experience a bigger, safer community wherever they live.
Yeah. And talking about, this is Banned Books Week, and Charlotte, like what she just brought up, I didn't know that you and Katherine had this connection before, that you've already been talking. So what has that been like, thinking about Banned Books Week and bringing it down, landing the plane, bring it down to 0?
Well, I think she's referring to the fact that during the Supreme Court case, the authors and illustrators connected in the Signal group. No war plans, but really hard trauma bonding. It was amazing to have immediate friends that just understood everything. And I think a lot of what book banning is about is kind of holding up these myths that keep prejudice going. Because prejudice depends on you not seeing the humanity of other people. You have to have stereotypes, you have to have lies, fear, all of this animus, and all of that came out in the case. I mean, some of the authors and illustrators received so much hate mail. It was awful. But what our stories do is the opposite. They humanize these experiences and they say, no, like, let's tell human stories. And so I think that's the work that we do. And this case allowed us to connect with each other as we're trying to connect with our audiences. And that was really a beautiful silver lining of the whole awful experience.
I'm so glad.
Yeah, I think that writing books can be fairly lonely. It's a very solitary experience. And even when you're doing a picture book and there's an illustrator and you have like a co-storyteller with you, it can be a very solitary experience. And being on the receiving end of book bans and hate mail can also be an isolating experience. And that the being able to unite with these 9 other authors or 10 other authors, I think, and then 9 more illustrators was just a very hopeful experience. Like, it really kind of saved this overwhelming and scary at times experience from being something that really it did take over our lives for quite a bit, but it didn't feel isolating. It was so great to be able to turn and say, did you see this? Someone said this. How do I respond to this? I'm struggling with this. I'm not feeling great this week. What's going on in your lives? And for someone to be like, I had a bad week too, but I just got this cute letter from this kid, and look at this picture of a puppy with Pride Puppy, and those were like always the best. So yeah, it was really a good counterweight to the rest of the experience.
Thank goodness, right?
Yeah.
There was a silver lining. I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
Again, that y'all have had to deal with that. It is horrible, and especially to hear that the evil letters that people get, but it's terrible. I do want to take a second before we wrap up for each of y'all to share where we can find you or anything you're working on right now.
You can probably find me most easily on my website, which you see displayed there, www www.charlotteswild.com. I have some things in the works, but nothing I can really talk about. So that's probably where you can find me best.
Thank you.
I'm at KatherineLockeBooks.com. I also have things coming out next year that I can't talk about right now, but you'll see more from me next year.
All right. Well, I cannot wait. Y'all, this has been such a pleasure. It was so much fun to talk with y'all and to learn about these amazing stories that you have written and sharing with kids and inspiring all of us. So appreciate it. All right. For the viewers out there, every library banned books week has so many more sessions coming up. There's amazing authors, amazing hosts, all kinds of conversations that are going to continue having just like we had tonight. So thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you again soon. So good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.